Join to City Council meeting Tuesday, March 6th. Please stand for the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mayor Follendorf,
Here.
Vice Mayor Herman,
Here.
Councilmember Behill,
Here.
Councilmember Matilde,
Here.
Councilmember Olivera.
Here.
Okay. Item number 2, report out of closed session. Earlier, we had closed session with staff. Currently, there is nothing to report, and direction was given to staff. Number 3, approval of the agenda. Is there anything that council wishes to pull from the agenda or edit to the agenda? Public comment?
I'll move we approve the agenda as presented.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, public comment. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the council on matters not on the agenda. State law prohibits the city council from acting upon matters not listed on the agenda. Is there any public comment? Nope, okay. Consent agenda. The following consent agenda items are expected to be routine. They will be acted upon the council at one time without discussion. Is there anything that the council wishes to edit? Public comment? Okay. We have 3 items on the consent agenda. Item number A, B, and C.
Move approval of the consent agenda. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
5-0. Moving on to our regular agenda. A, approval of Resolution 18-08, a resolution directing the preparation of the engineer's report for the continuation of the Landscape and Lighting District Number 1, Greenhorn Creek. Dave, there you are.
All right, thank you. So the item that's being presented to you is your consideration of a resolution directing the preparation of the engineer's report for the Landscape and Lighting District Number 1, which is Greenhorn Creek. So as the administering agency for the LLD, the council is required to adopt a resolution directing the preparation of the report, and that's a requirement according to the Streets and Highways Code. The engineer's report, which determines an assessment based on the improvements and costs in the coming year, is then brought back to the council for approval. The report will be prepared by SCI Consulting Group from Fairfield, which has been the engineer work for several years now. Last year, the engineer's report was presented to the council in mid-July, and we should be able to make that time schedule. We're starting early, we're here in March. So basically, that's it. Are there any questions?
Dave, you said it's a statutory requirement to do this engineering report,
Right. Correct.
and we're certain about that.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, that's in the resolution and prepared by SCI.
Okay. I was just concerned because it really hasn't much changed in the district since 2009 when the streets went to the city.
Mhm.
And if they're just reproducing the same report year after year, question the value of it, but it's required.
We have to.
And then, as part of this engineering report is the landscape contract. Do you happen to know what the terms are of that contract as it exists today?
Yeah, we got into the contract about the middle of last year. It had a 2-year term with 3 one-year extensions. So it's going to be at least 2 years from middle of last year, up to 5 years if we're okay with the work.
So we're 8 months into a 2-year deal.
Yeah, roughly.
And is it same price next year?
Yeah, it's all same price every year.
Okay. And what do you know about performance to budget relative to the 180-something thousand that was in the last report year
I
to
don't-
date? How we doing
Oh,
performance to budget?
I don't have a very good idea on that. I've only been slowly taking over the LLD for the last couple of months, and so I'm getting my feet more and more wet on it. And we really don't have any budget reports printed out on that I could research before I came to the meeting tonight. So I'm kind of lost at that one.
Maybe Melissa can give me something back on that. I'm just
Yes.
like to know how we're doing.
Year-to-date performance report was the question. Dave and I had an opportunity to talk, and we would anticipate something coming back to the council on April 3rd. Our next meeting, we know we have a full agenda slated, so our goal would be to deliver a presentation on that work on April 3rd.
Okay.
I believe, as Dave mentioned, in terms of a work plan for this fiscal year, there's not one that we've specifically identified outside of the budget, which identifies some specific tasks to be completed, and then also our response to complaints as they come in from the LLD and the community. And so we will be talking about the development of a work plan for next year's budget.
Right. And so this report should refer to the Horizon study as far as scope of work?
Yeah, I remember your question from the meeting before. The Horizon report was basically looking at how to restore the wetlands for the value as wetlands. But the LLD would also look at the wetlands or the area around it for amenities. How nice it would look, how to cut the cattails or when not to cut the
I thought
cattails.
the maintenance, the restoration and maintenance was all in that report.
Yeah, but there's a little bit extra that we have to go to make the area look nicer. And that's where I'm hanging out. I want to keep that open and see what we can possibly
Okay.
figure out.
Okay. And then that's the report that will also tell us how close we bump up that $300 maximum per household per year. That's where we get the number for that.
Any other council comment? Questions? No? Public? No? Okay. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 18-08?
I'll move.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Beal, and then 5-0. Okay. Item number B, authorization to advertise the Rise Bay Stairs Replacement Project. Dave.
It's me again.
Okay, just a minute, I think I want to recuse myself from this. That means I have to go in the other room. So if someone comes.
I will come and get you.
And just to be clear for the record, the vice mayor's recusing herself not because she has an actual conflict, but just in an abundance of caution.
Go on.
Okay, so after a long process, the city's ready to advertise the 4 contractors for the Raspberry Stairs replacement project. This project's being advertised with 2 alternatives, a wood structure and a steel structure. And the council will be able to select which alternative to construct after bids are received. The project's expected to be funded with general funds and excess local transportation funds. And that's dependent on what the Calaveras Council of Governments decision will be tomorrow night. So we put a short time frame on this. We asked that the bids would be due in 2 weeks, which means the contract would be brought back to council on April 3rd, unless there's some hiccups, and then it should take about a month and a half to be constructed, which is be in time for the frog jumps. So this is merely an advertisement to see what we can, kind of contractors we can get, and that's all this is. Are there any questions?
How far-reaching are you advertising?
We're bound to go to 3 plant houses, which I use Modesto, Stockton, and one other one. There's also several agents, several companies that electronically are websites we send them to. I also send them out to every contractor that I've ever gotten a contact from. And if you know of any of them, anybody that's interested, tell me and I'll send them at least the notice to contractors and the whole package if they want it.
Are these drawings sufficient to get a good bid?
Yeah, I think the wood one is more detailed than the steel one, but that's because I drew them.
Okay.
Dave, the stairs that are depicted in the drawing going down to the property next door, Are they part of the bid, or is it just simply a connection to existing stairs?
We're going to connect into the existing stairs right there on the east side,
So there's
yes.
no construction work other than a physical attachment?
It's physical attachment, but if we get into the project and there's some difficulty, or there's some hiccup, or there's something that's not safe, we'll take care of it.
And property owner participating in that in any way?
No,
Or is that all in the
as
city?
far as I know, the stairs from the parking lot all the way down is the city's the city's responsibility to maintain. The stairs that go side and under are private. So those are somebody else's responsibility.
Okay.
Is there any other questions from council? Public comment.
Good evening, Council. Debbie Ponte with Destination Angels Camp, and on this particular project, I'm happy to see it moving forward as it's a pretty important project for downtown and to get people moving in and about and utilize our back parking lot of Raspberry a little bit longer. I would ask in the RFP process that we contact Perry Welding and Distinctive Metals as opportunities to bid on this project. And as for a wood staircase, we have a number of local contractors here in Angels Camp that I would ask that we do some sort of outreach to and encourage them to bid. Thank you.
So, yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Debbie. Any,
And just to address Debbie's comments,
Oh,
we are
no,
putting that up.
definitely. They'll be
Local.
contacted, yeah.
Okay.
okay.
Yeah, I'm not shy about contacting people because, you know, they need the opportunity. If they don't know there's an opportunity, that's my fault.
Okay.
There's no further comment. Is there a motion to move forward?
I'll move to authorize to advertise the Raspberry Stairs Replacement Project.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 401.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
We decided we didn't need a staircase.
Talking to Jack and the dog.
Moving on, item number C, environmental contract in the amount of $21,324.91 with Augustine Planning Associates for documentation for the tractor supply. Dave Hannum, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council. Tonight before you, we have a contract for environmental services from Augustine Planning Associates. Just kind of give you some background about the firm. You pretty much know Amy Augustine. She's been around for the city for the last probably 10 or 15 years. I reached out to her for this work. This is work that she's done for us in the past for different projects, for McDonald's, for Mark Twain Medical Clinic, in a number of different locations. And she's done a lot of the environmental work on some of the, just some of the general stuff that we've done over the past 10 years. Basically, after reviewing a site plan of the property or a site visit of the property, staff felt that there was some issues regarding the property. They've got a creek that runs through the back. They've got a 100-year-old barn. They'll be removing oak trees. So there's a lot of mitigated, a lot of impacts that are going to need to be mitigated. So after calling her, she took a site visit, agreed, and she gave us a contract of $21,000. The majority of that contract is a cultural survey. It's about $10,000. It's half the contract, and that's due to the Native Americans who have been requesting that projects be done. And since we did discover an Indian school not more than about a mile and a half, 2 miles away, even though it was on the site, we've been under a lot more scrutiny in terms of environmental for those projects. So we thought it'd be a smart way to go. And what that does is allows us to identify the mitigation or identify the impacts, and then for the developer to be able to mitigate those impacts to what they call less than significant level. So it's actually kind of a higher environmental threshold than most projects we have in the city, but at the same time, it allows us to, It allows us to to move forward with a higher environmental clearance. With that, staff is recommending that you approve the contract, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions for the project.
Any questions or comment from council?
Just for my own benefit, the 21,000, you said that they've got a deposit on account.
Yeah, they have an existing deposit. The contractor is aware of this contract. In fact, normally what I do is that because we use a sole source, I talk to the developer, I give them the scope of work that Amy proposed, and to say, is that acceptable to you, or would you like me to go out to bid for other proposals? I have an email from them saying that yes, and they will pay for it. And we will collect those fees prior to public notice. So before we send a public notice out for a public hearing, which we're looking for to be done in May. We're hoping the latter part of May to get them to the Planning Commission, that they'll be paid up for all the costs.
Okay, thank you.
Dave, are we doing everything we can to fast track this project?
Well, I mean, there was only one other quicker way, and that was to do a notice of exemption. We would have had it on the commission agenda, but based on the environmental impacts, based on council's review of the project, that's what's kind of the main thing right now is the environmental. There are risks with everything that you do in terms of projects, so if there are chances where we can exempt projects and get them through a little faster, we try to do that, but on the same hand, if there's a project that just might have a little something, we take the time, and because what it's going to do is going to come back to you, and it's going to come back to the developer, letting them know, and somebody who wants to sue the city for a more intensive environmental document, and by doing some of these, it might take a little longer, but it saves them in the long run in terms of time and money. The other thing is that, I mean, we got the application in January. We hope to have it in May. I mean, that's 5 months. I mean, I don't know, that's pretty quick. I mean, we did Mark Twain Medical in 7.5, 8 months. I mean, that's just how long some of these, by the time because there are standard timelines that we just can't change by the state. I mean, we can't, it's either 20 or 30 days, or, we have to have time to go out and actually look at the project, review the project, make sure they got the right drainage plans. Like right now, we are kind of expediting because we didn't require up front the drainage plan, the landscape plan, some of the other plans that will come in at building permit. So, I mean, there could be some issues. Caltrans, it's on State Route 49. So, we try to fast track as fast as we can, but we also try to build in some safety net because if there are issues that arise, that we've got some time to adjust and mitigate if we have to, and put it on the developer. I told the developer, to be honest with you, I told him if you want to indemnify the city for the potential lawsuit between a notice of exemption and environmental determination, then but with the heat that's coming on us right now, just from the state agencies are getting a lot more, and with the creek back there, you got Department of Fish and Game that could raise up, you got Native Americans, you got Caltrans. Even though it's a 19,000 square foot building, not a lot of traffic impact, you don't know where that is going to come from. And so, again, this is a little bit on the safer side, and he didn't want to indemnify the city, so, for the potential lawsuit, so.
Yeah, want to make sure and hope that we are as business friendly as we can possibly be.
Yeah, we are working. We are trying to get them through the process. Like I said, we didn't get their applications in January, like late January 27th, and we're in February. We have the environmental done. As soon as if tonight's contract, they've been doing some preliminary work on the cultural study. So we're moving forward on that, and that's kind of like the big ticket. So once we get that, then we'll have a much better about length from about that point forward. So, but I'm still planning to get them to the Planning Commission in May, by the end of May.
Thank you.
Is there will there be any historical? I know are some of the buildings back there historical? Is that going to run into a problem, you think, or you think?
Well, what'll happen is it'll have to be studied, it'll have to be looked at, it'll have to be identified and marked. I mean, doesn't mean that it's not necessarily going to be standing. I mean, they will be able to take it down, but there's going to have to be some markings of it, some historic data for it, and it has to go through that process. And we'll identify that as part of the mitigation, as part of the environment, as part of the mitigated negative declaration.
Is there any way that they can use the bond?
They can what?
Or is it in the way? Okay.
No, the barn sits almost like right in the middle of the
Okay.
of the property, so, and the barns, as the property, and this is just for, it kind of like stair steps up, down back to the creek. The barn's like on the top, so it would have to, there's no way they're gonna have to lower the
I've
property.
just been so long, I couldn't remember where it was.
Yeah, it's on, right in the middle of where the site
Okay.
is. So.
Any other council comments? No? Public comment?
Debbie Pawnee with Destination Angels Camp, and on behalf of our board, we support this particular project and encourage you to approve this particular contract tonight so that we can continue to move forward at a swift pace, as well as do our due diligence as necessary for this particular project. Thank you.
Any other comment? No? Okay. Is there a motion?
I move approval of the contract.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
5-0. Next item, Resolution 18-11, authorizing $65,000 budget allocation from the general fund reserve and authorize the, for a request for a proposal to procure a consultant to conduct an organizational review and strategic budget sustainability study with the exploration of local revenue alternatives. So, moving to
Perfect.
Melissa.
Thank you. I recommend the support of this item. I've had an opportunity, after being here now for just over a month, to meet with each of you and to meet with department heads and staff to discuss some of the issues and concerns that we have for the city. And among them, top priority is financial sustainability for the city, a #1 concern. As I work with department heads and staff, they're challenged with the lack of technology, deferred maintenance, staffing challenges, and the city's financial position definitely having its effect on employee morale as well. And as I've had time to meet with each of you, the city's financial situation and condition is your first and foremost priority, making it difficult to weigh various community services and prioritize those community services with limited revenue. The council for the last few years has had a general fund deficit. The actual deficit over the 3 years was approximately $478,000. It reached a high in 14-15, and with the council's direction over the last few years and a focus on cost-cutting measures, you reduced that deficit from over $400,000 to $19,000 in the last 2016-17 audit. So some of those changes that reduced our deficit in the general fund were increases in property tax, about $48,000. We received some fire reimbursement from Strike Team. We reorganized our finance department, and then there were miscellaneous other items that contributed to that as well. So with that, we've also had a hiring freeze in our current budget. Our current 17-18 budget is looking at a deficit of approximately $103,000, and this is the general fund. We've also had one-time budget adjustments affecting that budget, equating to $29,000. And already factored into this budget includes the reclassification of the finance, as previously discussed. There was a reduction in our Public Works Department of a full-time position some years ago. That was the initiation of cuts to that department. We initiated a hiring freeze on our Public Works Supervisor. We've initiated a hiring freeze on a vacant fire department position. And then we've continued to implement cuts to training, capital needs, facilities, and infrastructure maintenance. We are looking at an investment in CalNet, which will change our phone system, which we believe will ultimately have a cost savings to our general fund. And also, we had some successful contract negotiations that are benefiting us in terms of the lease that we have with the Visitors Bureau and the post office. So for these reasons, I'm recommending a consultant. From my perspective, and please keep in mind the time that I've been here, and I've also been here without our full-time finance director. We've had the support of Mike, our interim finance director, but we're not even in a position to generate quarterly financial reports yet. But with that, my instincts are letting me believe that we can't continue to cut our way out of the situation and that we need to explore revenue alternatives for the city. One of the reasons that I've recommended this plan and the consultant is because I've heard from a number of people that there's a need to do an organizational assessment to make sure that before we go to the community with the request for a sales tax, a property tax, whatever the alternative revenue source may be, that we've analyzed our service delivery models, conducted staffing analysis, determined best practices for organizations of our size, looked at service delivery alternatives, whether they be contracting or consolidation, and that we've identified the potential for a sustainable budget strategy for the City of Angels. That is sort of the heart and soul of this recommendation. The bottom line is, though, from my perspective, it's going to take additional revenue, and not additional revenue to increase levels of service, but additional levels just to keep and sustain our basic levels of service. From the analysis that we've done preliminarily, I think that we could request a 2% increase in TOT and a half-cent sales tax and still not exceed the gain limit, and still just be able to provide basic levels of service and start to catch up on the maintenance that hasn't been done over the past several years. So I do have the recommendation to identify those alternatives. My goal would have been to work aggressively and try to have something on the November ballot initiative, but I received word today that a deadline I believe to be August 3rd is now June 29th for us to get our resolution for the November ballot to the county before it can go to the Board of Supervisors. So that does not give us a lot of time to incorporate the analysis of the study into a potential campaign. It also doesn't really afford us a lot of time for that campaign. So that is new information that I received today. I also received information that the county is potentially moving forward with the exploration of a consultant to evaluate and develop a TOT campaign rather than moving forward with a November ballot initiative themselves. So that's new information as well. But ultimately, I believe it's at the council's discretion as to the level of study and analysis that we believe critical and fundamental to gaining community support for a local initiative, because I believe it's 2/3 support of the voters for a special tax, and I believe with new legislation, even a general tax will at some point require 2/3. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Ted.
So if it's a general tax, we can still 50, but if it's specifically allocated for something like public safety or something like that, you're looking at a 2/3 vote.
So I think those are big limits to reach. So that's why I have this recommendation. I would also support and encourage the council to consider moving forward with a TOT, potential 2% increase, to bring back to the council for consideration, but I believe we would need more time to move forward with a half-cent sales tax for a public safety measure. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, not necessarily a question, but I would like to commend you on the detail that you put into this preparation of this analysis. As far as I'm concerned, it addresses pretty much everything I personally, and I'm going to guess we collectively, have brought to you individually, or maybe Doug, for consideration. So I think it's comprehensive, I think it's well thought out, and I think you did one hell of a job pulling this together.
Thank you.
I agree, and I was thinking of also the TOT, if we can do that more quickly, I think that's a good way to go. We need to find something sooner, and then if we have to do the half-cent sales tax, it has to be in 2019. Is that where it would have to be, Alyssa, the sales tax? Or could we fit it in soon?
You could call a special election, it's just.
Oh, we can.
There's an increased cost
I see.
of doing that, and that might, you'd have to weigh the cost about whether or not that would make it
Yeah,
prohibitive.
I mean, could we make it into, or if, I guess to me, they wondered about the discussion of, whether or not we really think that the public would respond to a sales tax without more preparation, I guess, wondered.
So one thing you might want to consider is we could look into proposals for potential, polling that can be done to kind of gauge
Oh.
where we're at, and then you can have actually push questions about, that allows you to see how the numbers change with more information. I think the only question is whether or not, and you're probably looking at something in the $5,000-$6,000 range to be able to do a poll, so.
So intuitively, what I believe to be the case is that we need the analysis and we need some long-term financial strategy and planning underway. But I also think that short-term, it could be beneficial to go forward with a 2% TOT in November and connect that TOT to cultural services, whether that be the museum or other community events. And then I think utilize the data and then also potentially spread the cost of a campaign for a half-cent sales tax initiative for public safety into the next fiscal year. But I think that it would be beneficial to see a half-cent sales tax, which would be the bulk of the revenue generation compared to a 2% TOT, be utilized for public safety. And then the other area we hear of concern is community projects or public works projects. And I think that with a half-cent sales tax, we've really only got one chance to go and sort of get that right with the voters. And so I think that's why a concentrated effort to make sure we've analyzed the situation, we know the constraints, and we're able to communicate that effectively to the public so that we can provide for more success for a measure such as that.
Does our TOT tax, is it at 10% right now?
10%.
Okay. And do we know an average? Not in this area, more in a more urban area, say the Bay Area and the Sacramento area?
I do not know that.
Okay.
That's information that I can get and bring back.
What would it take for staff? What would we be looking at for staff to start the process for if we were to go down the route of TOT for the November ballot?
I think from my perspective, and Doug can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would seek approval for this study with the potential of looking at the June primary or November 2019 election for sales or alternative, and then I would request direction from the council to bring back something at the next council meeting for TOT consideration.
How does everyone feel about that?
I-
Since it's not, it's a tax for
It's
people
not
to
on
visit, it's not a tax
The
to
TOT
get it
is
on the
fine.
Yeah,
ballot.
it's on the, yeah.
Like the-
So I
It
understand
isn't on the people.
the-
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, the county understands at 8% right now, and they want to revisit it. I don't know, this is a rumor, but they want to go to 12, or they want to go equal to Angels Camp. I'm not sure which. But they're putting it off, and they're going to put a lot of money into this venture because they're 0 for 2. The last 2 times they tried to increase the TOT, they've struck out with the voters. So they're putting together a large campaign to increase the TOT. My only concern with putting it on this ballot is that we wouldn't really have an opportunity to piggyback on that campaign and benefit from it. And we'd be taking a chance. And it's not a huge dollar amount to wait. It's like $129,000, I think, if the full thing passes.
But when is the county looking to put it on? The June primary?
That I'm not sure.
And I don't want to wait on the county. I mean, the city has had pretty good success, at least when it comes to TOT. I mean, someone please correct me if I'm wrong. But we've been pretty, with all the merchants. I mean, if ACFA and DAC are behind this and they can help with it for November, I don't see why not risk. I don't want to lose an opportunity, but I mean, that's up to the majority of the council.
I feel the same way. I definitely think that we just can't keep postponing, and we need to start having some generation, and we might find, I guess, possibly the economy's improving and we may get more tourism and, even do better this year, but we really need to be thinking ahead and do it more quickly, I think. and then do the half-cent later.
What's your sense for the support this has among the folks that sell the lodging around here?
I don't have that, access to that information.
Is there
No.
just kind of a general feeling about whether they would support that, or just,
I think typically what I do here is that we would have a need to really communicate that TOT is not a tax that is borne the citizens or the residents that live in the city. And then the other thing that I often hear, but it doesn't come from our hotel owners or managers, is that most people don't even ask what the TOT is when they book a hotel. That they're going to a location and 10%, 12%, some places are 24%. It's not a factor or determination in where they choose to stay. Now, that coming from a consumer perspective, that's not necessarily the perspective of management or owners, business owners, and I don't have that information right now.
If we can get that support from DAC and ACPA, make sure everyone's on board, I mean, I don't see why we can't go forward with it. If there's some kind of halt and they both come back and say, no, the merchants are saying no, then okay, let's go ahead and do what Scott says. But in the meantime, I don't want to delay another missed opportunity because we've already lost the June.
The November 2018
Yeah.
potential,
Well,
right?
this June, we had been talking about it for a while, so
Right.
we've already lost June. I don't want to lose November.
So, and I think all of these are considerations. If the council directs me to explore the potential for 2% TOT on the November 2018, then I can work to determine what the average in rural areas such as this, and I can work with Destination Angels Camp and ACPA to talk with the hotel owners to see if this is something that's of concern to them, and then that's all information that I could report back to you at the
And
next meeting.
When you're looking into the average, I think we have to take into consideration what our area provides in regards to activities. We have the concerts in the area up the hill. We've got obviously lots of outdoor activities. We do have lots of wineries. So if we can look into areas that support that type, because 2% is fine with me, but I'm not opposed to even if areas are higher, you know.
Yeah.
And again, conversations that I have about TOT, I always try to make sure that people clearly understand this is not a tax to our citizens. This is a tax that everyone pays anywhere they stay in a hotel. You know, you might be surprised at how high some TOTs
Well,
are.
that's just it. As communities keep ratcheting it up, other communities say, "Oh, I can do that too." So there's an indirect cost to everybody when it's a tax.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to, if we can, I don't know if it's possible, we get some information on the, I know it's possible, on the votes where the county failed twice. What were the percentages, yea or nay, and what was the objection? I'd like to know, because my only concern going forward, I have no problem putting anything on the ballot like this. My only problem is I just don't want to do it wrong.
Right.
And if we have to wait a year to get it right, and we can actually take advantage of the counties, the money they're spending on a campaign specifically for this, that might be an opportunity that we don't want to pass up, especially if it comes back where the numbers were 40-60 or something, there's a pretty big gap. That means some salesmanship has to be done, and we have to get the professionals out there. So we can try to wing it, or we can try to,
And
oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. And I definitely understand that perspective, but I think looking at the structural deficit that we've had for a number of years, going into this year's budget, and recognizing that we're running out of areas to cut, is it in our interest to try to push this initiative and to get some alternative funding that would support the general fund, potentially heal the structural hole that I've got, while we can do this sort of short-term, long-term planning, and then over the course of a 2-year fiscal year period, put together a campaign and an initiative to go to the taxpayers for what I believe our general fund ultimately needs, which is a revenue solution for public safety and public works, where are the areas that hit the general fund budget most prevalently. So I think that
I look at this as a short-term strategy to address an immediate need on the revenue side. And then we can't give up on, what's the, and I don't even want to say long-term, because it needs to be something that we address within a 1 to 2 year period, but to sustain our public safety infrastructure.
Well, I think this also starts the ball rolling that, we are serious about this, and, and get staff on board that we are concerned about it, and we're trying to adjust it the best we can to make sure that we can keep doing what we want to do.
And based on our preliminary assessment and talks with Mike, our finance officer, we're not looking like we are going to close the fiscal year at a deficit this year, because there's been a number of positions that have been vacant. And so we're keeping an eye on it, but it looks like we will not be closing the fiscal year at a deficit. But in terms of the sustainability of that budget and what we've committed to spend, should those positions be filled, that trend will then change. And I think when I look at the options that we have here and the potential revenue that we could generate, even with a 2% TOT and even with a half-cent sales tax, we're just getting ourselves to the level where we can start to sustain and maintain basic levels. We're not even talking really about expansion of services. It's just reestablishing basic levels of service and being able to maintain that infrastructure.
So this is kind of morphed into, well, one more comment or question. If we put a specific, if we call it cultural needs or museum or something, put a specific tie to it, does that mean 2/3 to pass?
Depends on, it depends on how you write it. So you can put the intent language, like, we'd like to use it for this, or you can accompany it, like Stockton's often done with advisory measure underneath, where you basically say, hey, this passes, would you like it to go to cultural? And you can follow that or not. Or you can specifically lock it up and it has to be spent that way. If you do the latter, then you do trigger 2/3.
Yeah, I think if we want to try for the November ballot, we got to go the 50-50 route. Whatever it takes to majority, whatever we need, however we need to word it, so the majority takes it right fast. So now this
We
is
can
kind of
do that.
morphed into 2 different agenda items. We're kind of separating the TOT from this agenda item for
Yeah.
time constraint reasons.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just bringing that up because of my second to last bullet
Right.
on my staff memo. When I talked about the November 2018 election, I wanted to give you updated information that some dates had changed, and that my concern for meeting that with anything other than a TOT is because now that date is June 29th. So I'm willing to consider council's direction on an alternative there based on that information. That is new to my staff memo.
Now, do you need a vote to separate out the TOT, or do you have your consensus that you can go ahead? We're good?
It's all agendized together,
Okay.
so you can just give direction and
We can just have, if we have a consensus, are we voting, are we having consensus on the TOT and then voting this, or does this include the TOT?
you can either separate it out, or you can do it together. I mean, I think the biggest thing of this item is whether or not you want to allow the $65,000 budget allocation.
Yeah.
But then in the meantime, you would know, Melissa, to bring us back next
Right.
meeting.
That's what
with
I
the
would,
TOT.
that's my goal, is that if
That's-
I could get approval for the 65,000 and with the new information on the requirements for the November 2018 direction to come back with consideration of a 2% TOT for the November 2018 election. And then my instinct says that I would be running parallel path, where I'm working with a consultant, we're doing the planning, the assessment, and then we're also moving forward with a TOT in November 2018.
One other comment I wanted to mention is, I know recently at the last CVB event, they did do a polling of the majority of the merchants at that event. And so I don't know where Lisa is with those numbers, but I think we should still reach out to her to maybe give you some data, at least from there, where the majority of merchants stand. While it's going to be across the county, it can at least, you can see positive, negative, whatever.
Perfect. So I think with the questions that have been posed by the council regarding outreach with business owners, the Visitors Bureau. Potentially, I would recommend the April 3rd agenda rather than the March 20th agenda to bring this item back for your consideration.
Yeah.
With answers to those questions.
So now the council, is there any other before I go to public comment? Nope, okay, public comment?
Of course.
Okay.
Debbie Pawnee with Destination Angels Camp. So we wholeheartedly, as Destination Angels Camp Board, encourage you to approve this expenditure for this kind of survey and study. I think we all owe it to ourselves to get some real good data, get some information from our business community and some of our business leaders on all of these potential, you might say, taxations. So we support this, and we offer our support through Destination Angels Camp as being an advisory capacity in nature and working with our advisory members in regards to perhaps focus groups and education and things along that line to help better understand the community's opinions about it. But more importantly, our businesses in Angels Camp, our small businesses, and do some outreach to our hotel, bed and breakfast, Airbnb kinds of folks to get feedback from them in our local community. The county is floating different ideas. It changes almost daily as to what they might do, when they might do it, and how much the increase might be. And we think this study is pretty important because we all have ideas and they're all floating out there. But we need to have some really good data and financial analysis as to where we stand and what we can do and how we can move forward. And from there, recommendations brought back to council. There are many avenues in which you can follow. And doing this study will, I think, provide a little clearer pathway on what to do next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Any other public comment? Okay, if none, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move approval
I'll second.
of this resolution.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
5-0.
Go to work.
Okay. And do I have direction to bring back consideration of the TOT?
Yes.
Okay, and I
That's
will,
included.
2% or more,
okay.
whatever the data shows.
Okay.
Would be acceptable. And I think, I'd just like to make a comment of, please, anybody that has a conversation in regards to TOT, let people know this is not a tax on us, it's a tax to benefit Angels Camp.
Thank you. I will bring that back, and Doug has warned me that we are potentially up against some deadlines. I'll make it a priority for the March 20th.
Okay.
In the event that we have to have a special meeting, I just want to let you know that we may consider a special meeting for this item.
E, legislative update.
I don't want you all to get bored. Mayor, council, members of the public, thank you very much. Tonight I have with me Josiah Young, who's one of the lobbyists or legislative advocates in our government relations team. Just as a reminder, since it's the first time that we've done this with Angels Camp, this is a free add-on service that we do for all of the communities that we serve as city attorney for. So what Josiah is going to go over tonight is essentially a recap of last year, maybe a little few tidbits on this legislative session. We'll probably be coming back to you because we've come up with 2 or 3 ideas that we probably are going to be sponsoring on behalf of the communities that we represent to make small little changes. So we'll be making reports to those as the time goes by. With that, I'll let Josiah introduce himself and a little bit more and do his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mayor, council members, and members of the public. My name is Josiah Young. I'm an associate with the firm Churchwell White. So I'm very pleased to be here with you all to provide a brief legislative update, kind of going over some of the bills that were passed in the legislature at the state level last year. And as Mr. White said, kind of preview just briefly what's coming up this year, and I'll get into it with that. So first, I just wanted to, after introducing myself, introduce the senior partner in the legislative affairs shop at our firm, one of Mr. White's partners, Randy Pollock. Randy Pollock has been in and around the Capitol for more than 20 years. He's very well respected, and so he and I kind of form the team, the sub-team that does most of the legislative advocacy, but we have, I think, 4 or 5 of our attorneys as registered lobbyists, and our law firm offices are right across the street from the Capitol. So there's a dedicated team who kind of focuses all the time on legislative affairs, and I'm a member of that team, along with Randy. So jumping into the legislative update, I first want to just point out that we have an entire update available online. If you go to the Churchwell White website, you can see a comprehensive list of pretty much all the bills that were passed last year, or those relevant, to certain subsections that would be important for a municipality to know. So we'll talk about, elections and local government and police and fire, and there's a summary in there. There's a important to know category, which kind of picks out 3 to 5 bills that you should probably have on your radar. And then there's worth noting, which kind of just summarizes a bunch of the other smaller, or I can't say smaller, but maybe less relevant pieces of legislation. But that's an available resource for you all. You can go on there, you can check it out if you would so choose to. But I think what's important to note is that, as Doug indicated, we are here actually as a service to you all. So Mr. White sits on the, this dais as a city attorney, but we also have folks in Sacramento who are prepared to answer your calls. I'll leave a bunch of my business cards here just in case anyone had any questions. You can certainly feel free to reach out to me. But we in the past have run some legislation at Churchwell White to benefit one of our cities, and we would be open to doing that again. So that's kind of the purpose of this document, but also the purpose of why we're here today. So I'll just set these up front right now. All right. So the highlights from last year, one of the most prevalent issues that we saw was dealing with deferred road maintenance and kind of finding funding for that. So SB 1, Senate Bill 1, which is kind of indicative of how much a priority it was the first Senate bill that was actually introduced, and it carried through the session, and there was a lot of attention from the governor's office, a lot of political push and pull in terms of where that funding was coming from. But the bill was ultimately passed, and it creates a program to address deferred road maintenance on California state highways and local streets. What the cost of that was a 12 cents per gallon gas tax, an increase on the current gas tax that raised 12 cents, and also increased vehicle registration fees anywhere from $25 to $175 based on the vehicle value. So the trade-off there is that there's increased prices at the pumps, but there's a lot of funds that have been now made available to fix the roads that are in need of fixing. ACA 5 is kind of a companion measure to SB 1, and what that initiative actually will be is going to be on the June 2018 ballot. It's like a lockbox provision. It's going to ensure that the monies raised by this increased gasoline fees are going to go directly to road maintenance. So there's not kind of a flexibility for future governors or those making decisions on the budget to say, we need to take some of that money elsewhere. That money is for road maintenance. And feel free to ask questions if you have anything as I'm going through this. Another kind of priority of the legislature last year was addressing affordable housing. That really stems out of a bigger conversation about homelessness that you're seeing in some of these big cities, Sacramento, San Francisco, LA. But they started taking steps in the direction of increasing access to affordable housing. SB 2 by Senator Tony Atkins, essentially what it does is it imposes a $75 recording fee with a cap of $225 on real estate transactions. And that fee is essentially starting the process of collecting funds and making revenue available for affordable housing. Really, that bill was more of a legislative intent bill. It made findings and declarations talking about the need to establish a permanent and ongoing source of funding. The first step was increasing the recording fee. SB 3 is also going to be going to the voter for authorization, and what this bill would do would issue a $4 billion bond to try to address the affordable housing crisis. That will be on the November 6th general election ballot. So that'll be something that the California voters have to decide on. If so, That money has been allocated to finance existing housing programs, infrastructure, housing grant programs, so it was kind of just a concerted push by the legislature to begin addressing affordable housing.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes,
I was
ma'am.
wondering about the homeless, or how would a city be able to tap into that money? I mean, we've been talking about homelessness
Sure.
and also providing some housing for homeless.
You know, I think the frank reality, and I'll talk about this year, you know it's coming up next, I guess, you've got a preview, but, you know, they're still going to be working to address the issues around homelessness and affordable housing. I think that a lot of the commentary that's come on the heels of SB 2, SB 3 that we're discussing now is really that money is not going to be enough. So I don't think that money is going to be made available to a local city that's
Yes,
going
I was wondering.
to help you all address the issue, but I do know that because of the push that has been kind of started with these measures, there's going to be more coming this year, and the sentiment around the state has been, well, this is not enough. This is not addressing the issues in our community.
Yeah, well, I know in the Bay Area and around that, there's a lot more like tents and things along the freeways and that sort of thing, so.
Certainly.
Worse than what we have, but just wondering how we could have some funneled to us to help us at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would probably rank homelessness in terms of the issues that we deal with, and ranked, it's probably in the top 3 of almost every city that we
I would think
represent.
so, it's just.
It doesn't matter how
sad.
rural, how urban, you know, closer to the Bay Area, closer to the Hill, it doesn't matter, it's the same issue.
It's very sad.
Thank you. Another major issue that came about last year, and it continues to be a relevant topic of discussion, was around the sanctuary state focus of the California legislature. This was something that they took on very early too. This was certainly had resonance of the kind of California versus DC effect, but it also is very relevant to some of the issues that are, as I said, still ongoing right now. So SB 54, what it did essentially was repeal data sharing requirements, and it kind of put some limitations on law enforcement officers in inquiring about immigration status, coordinating and communicating with the federal government. SB 29 was the companion, and actually these are just 2 bills of a broader suite of actually, you know, bills that really went to address immigration, particularly as, you know, for state level reforms in California. SB 29 prohibits local law enforcement from contracting with federal law enforcement in terms of sharing data again, but also if they've detained someone, you know, setting up relationships where they're sending that person directly to the federal agencies. So this is going to continue to get some attention, especially in the light of, I said, the ongoing conversations, but they did take some action last year.
In light of things like this, how is it possible for an elected official or a police officer to adhere to the oaths
Of the
to both the
Constitution, right?
constitutional
I know,
federal government and the
Constitution.
state? How is it possible to honor both your oath?
That's a difficult question.
And is that a concern?
I don't think it's a concern. I mean, one of the big challenges that has come out is states' rights versus federal authority, because, you know, the federal government, all things not expressly granted to it were reserved to the state. And you've seen this happen in other things. It started off with really, you know, most recently with the Right to Die movement and the battle between federal and state laws. I think that when you look at cannabis and when you look at sanctuary state and stuff like that, you're seeing the rise of issues that we just haven't seen, frankly, you know, in my lifetime until recently. And I think it's going to really take judicial intervention to kind of square out, you know, where states' rights break and where federal rights go in. Because one of the things that the federal government's always relied on is interstate commerce. But a lot of these issues, you're just talking about what we're going to do and how business is going to be conducted within the state, or what level of cooperation that we're going to have. What's more problematic, which is not in the slides, is when you actually start regulating state businesses who, if you don't, you could actually be you either wind up violating state law or federal law. You're caught in this catch-22, and I think that creates some really complicated constitutional issues. But I think you can fulfill these obligations by understanding that there isn't some inherent conflict, and that's why we have the courts to interpret these these things. One point I want to make particularly for the public or people who aren't here, these are just bills that have been passed and an analysis of the impact of them. We don't take any kind of political position on them. This is just a discussion. It's not about whether or not it's right or wrong. It's about this is what the legislature has decided to do, and here's how we work within the confines of that. Because local governments are, and general law cities are particularly vulnerable because when you go back to the redevelopment decisions, the whole law in there says we are basically just subsets of the state government. We have limited authority with operating off of the grant of authority from the state government, and that goes, and those from the decisions of how the state could come in and grab all the redevelopment money and just take it, because from the court cases, it basically says it's just their money anyway. So there's a lot of interesting legal issues going on right now.
I kind of have an observation, just an observation, that it seems like in order to guarantee people don't have to violate their consciences, you could just change the oath and drop the federal. It will no longer be responsible to the federal. I mean, that to me makes the only sense. You say, oh, I don't have to, but anyway, I'm sorry.
But yeah, I mean, I'm very aware of the.
Because if I make an oath and I think, oh yeah, okay, I don't want to violate that oath. Oh, let's just drop the federal Constitution. Heck, we don't need it.
I'm very aware of the internal challenges, and like I said, that's why we have judges and courtrooms to be able to decide these issues where there's it's open for debate, I guess.
I know, whatever.
Sure.
I'm done.
If you could wait until the presentation concludes and we do public comment if possible.
I'm sorry. That answered helped the question, but I think with Mr. White, I just wanted to echo it. I'm actually just reporting on these bills. This is just what came up.
I'm
if I could be involved in legislating all of this stuff, that'd be great, right? But I'm not involved in all of these
I'm just
measures.
speaking to the air. Don't
No, I understand.
have no personal.
And frankly, the reason that these are highlighted subjects and bills is because they are controversial. They do kind of change the way that California is operating and the way that even in certain instances, local government has to operate.
Yeah.
So the implications are significant, not without the controversy not lost. And I mean, we know that this is inherently a political system when we're talking about the legislature. So just kind of suffice it to say that these are officially chaptered laws in the state of California.
Yeah.
Moving right into cannabis. So last year was a big year in terms of cannabis, though California has had a history of medical marijuana. Prop 64 in 2016, authorized or legalized recreational cannabis. What this measure that we're talking about here, and there are a lot of also companion bills to this, but SB 94, what it did was consolidate the recreational and medical systems or regulatory schemes. I know that each city, I think that's the key from this slide, is that cities retain local control. So the city ultimately has the authority to make a decision about how to operate commercial businesses or not, and I know that that's the decision left in your all hands. Final major highlight is a park bond, SB 5, by the current Senate Pro Tem, President of the Senate, Kevin De Leon. What this does is it will put a $4 billion bond on the June 2018 ballot. Here, there are some implications locally. There is an authorization of a minimum of $200,000 per city in park funding. So that should be trickling down to the local municipalities. And also, there's an allocation of $725 million for park poor communities. I think the objective of this is to update California's local and state parks.
I do have a question about that.
Sure.
Only because it's been back and forth with debate. Were they ever able to resolve the disadvantage aspect of it, of what they consider disadvantage?
Poor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I frankly,
because I know that was going back and forth.
so I'm pretty confident that this kind of the funding allocation has not yet happened. So I think that there's another issue, if there are challenges to it, that'll have to be shaken out and resolved. And again, this is something that I'd love to be a resource on, but I don't know what the definition of park poor is.
Okay,
All
yeah.
right.
Well, and that was always the question. It's like, well, how can we support something if you can't even properly explain the bill to us if we're gonna, what is it,
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you all probably have associations or the League of Cities or whomever who kind of provide you information. And again, the point of the service that our law firm provides is that we can be an individual representative for you. So even if there's something that the league or any association is recommending, you know, we'd be happy to take a deep dive and look at these issues. We'd be happy to leverage our resources and our kind of capital at the Capitol and say, hey, this is what our city feels, and be that voice for you.
I have a question on that. It says minimum 200,000 per city and park funding. And obviously, that's earmarked. It has to go to park. Can that go to Public Works? Or do you know how flexible that is?
No, I believe that's strictly for parks, right?
So we'd be getting $200,000 a year that we have a hard time, we gotta figure out how to spend.
And I don't believe that it's an
Can't go
annual
general fund.
allocation.
Well, we can be creative and, I mean, there's a
Oh, it's
certain
not
level
annual.
of creativity.
It's a, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Sure. All right, this is a lightning round. This is some of them less important, some of them significant, but it kind of is just an opportunity to highlight briefly how varied and how many laws are really flying across that legislative desk. AB 168, salary information. An employer can no longer ask how much someone made at their prior job when hiring and making hiring decisions. So that information cannot be brought in. Calderon, this has an implication on state and local governments. Diaper changing stations, all state and local agencies and public venues like movie theaters and restaurants must provide a diaper changing station, at least one, for men and women. This is the one that's a little bit more relevant right now. AB 424.
For men or women, it depends.
No, for children. I think this is to be accessible for.
Both the men's restroom and the women's restroom.
Exactly.
There has to be a place for a man to change a diaper as well as a woman.
Oh, my goodness.
So you cannot just put it in, for instance, the
Women's.
female's
I see.
restroom.
Bathrooms.
Yeah, and without complicating things, they're also requiring a gender-neutral bathroom in the state as well, but that's not on our list. So you can check out our update for more information about that. AB 424, guns in schools. So there was a measure implemented actually a year prior to last year. That gave superintendents authority to allow teachers to have concealed carry weapons on school grounds. This bill repeals that initiative, so it makes the affirmative decision that no, you cannot have teachers with concealed carries in schools in California. Again, we know that's extremely relevant now, given in the wake of the Parkland shooting, some of the commentary by the president and some discussions going on out there to say maybe that's a solution, but California has legislatively decided no, there's no authority for teachers to have concealed carry weapons in schools. AB 830 repeals the high school exit examination, so it's doing away with a requirement that has been in place since 2006. So not that long of a history, but as of now, students do not have to pass that test to get out of school. And a last one, and I know this one's a little more on the fun side, this is pedestrian crossing signals. AB 390 means that a pedestrian can legally enter a crosswalk when the hand signal is up, as long as they have the countdown that shows how many seconds left. So, all across the board right there. I will move into a quick outlook on 2018. It's a statewide election year. We have an undecided governor's race that is, closely coming to a decision point. Gavin Newsom is likely the front runner. He's raised most of the money. He was polling way ahead of the other candidates. Antonio Villaraigosa, former mayor of Los Angeles, is kind of the nearest challenger. And then you also have John Chang, who's the current treasurer, who's kind of in the mix amongst other candidates, but those are probably the top front runners. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. There are also going to be 3, and actually now 4 special elections. I have to update that slide because there have been 4 vacancies from the California legislature this year due to sexual harassment and sexual misconduct issues. So they're going to have to fill those seats, which are now currently vacant. The 2018 budget, in Governor Brown's final stretch as the governor, and due to term limits, I guess he won't be coming back again and again. But there's $5 billion more going into the rainy day fund for a total of $13.5 billion. There are projections of recession and federal cuts and some of that back and forth pull with Washington. And another thing that the governor's, in his current budget version, made sure to allocate were funds for unexpected emergencies. The landslides and the natural disasters and the flooding that has hit this state pretty hard over the last year and a half have caused a focus on preparing for that, preparedness. So there's a significant set-asides for those type of emergencies. Again, addressing the sexual harassment issue has really become a huge focus of the Capitol. The bill introduction deadline just passed last month on the 16th, and there were some 1,500 bills or so introduced even in the last days. But really leading up to that time, there hadn't been something major to focus on, like sanctuary cities last year or the SB1 Road Improvement Fund. There was a lot of focus on sexual harassment, changing the policies, changing the transparency, providing whistleblower protection for, state employees. And I'm sure that those things are going to have an effect kind of into the local governments as well when we see kind of a final, I guess it can't be final, but once there's a determination on how the Capitol should be really instituting protocols against these things, because it seems to be a pervasive culture. There's also going to be a Senate pro tem change. That's actually happening this month. So the former Senate pro tem, Kevin De Leon, is terming out of his office. He's going to be running for U.S. Senate against Dianne Feinstein, California's senior senator. He is getting obliterated on the fundraising, but it was interesting to note that last weekend or the weekend before last, the Democratic Party, California Democratic Party had its convention, and neither of the two received an endorsement. Neither of them got the requisite 60 delegate votes. So it's an interesting race, although it looks like De Leon's probably out. But in terms of the California legislature, he certainly is no longer going to be the pro tem, and it's going to be from San Diego, Senator Tony Atkins is going to be assuming leadership of the pro tem role this month. Short and long-term solutions to the affordable housing crisis, as we talked about earlier, they're going to continue to focus on trying to address the homelessness from a statewide perspective. And last but not least, there will be continued responses to the federal government in relation to most of these policies: offshore drilling, cannabis, the tax cuts and the tax issues that have gone on. There have been a lot of threats and posturing by the California elected officials in saying that, we're protecting our California. If the federal government doesn't want to do it, we're going to do it our way. And that's guaranteed to cause some tension. So with that being said, I really appreciate everyone's time and for having me here. I look forward to the opportunity to work on your behalf if
I
if
have
need
another
be.
question I wanted to ask.
Yes, ma'am.
This had to do with, can there be any kind of legislation for CalPERS where the state can direct money in some ways to relieve the burden on the cities? Do you know if there's any kind of thinking about that?
Did you have any thoughts?
So there is conversations about that, but that's unlikely to be the solution of them looking to take state money and put it to kind of shore up CalPERS. More of what they're talking about is creating more flexibility for the cities in terms of the ability to outsource what would currently be full-time positions, so using contract folks to do positions, to get rid of kind of ongoing obligations. They might look at making it easier to opt out of CalPERS. Right now, if you opt out of CalPERS, you have to pay all of your deferred obligations, which makes it kind of a poison pill to ever get out. So when they're looking at solutions, those are the solutions that they're looking at, because obviously the most recent changes in performance of the portfolio have created a less than desired result. And so everybody around the state and local jurisdictions are really looking at 2020 and the implications to their budget and whether or not cities can be sustainable after that.
Okay.
There were 3 bills that I asked from the last meeting, and I can't think of them right off the top of my mind. But the compost for cow recycle, cow recycle, the compost with the state mandates, and that's something I think we might need to be discussing with you on how to either get an exempt, or if they're going to be giving money back to local rural cities under an X amount of population to build that infrastructure, or can we be exempt? I know that's come up a lot down in Sacramento about rural area doesn't have the same issues that San Francisco and LA have. The other one was the housing mandate that they're coming down with and bypass local government to allow developers to do what they want, which loses all control for development, and the ramifications. Oh, you have them?
Yeah, she has those numbers. So
Perfect.
what I'll do is I'll send an email blast to the council with an update on the status of those bills, and then maybe we can look at potentially having those as an informational item if it warrants to give an update on them.
And I apologize that we didn't have that included in this
No, I just-
presentation.
No, thank you. I did have a question for you with cap and trade. What is do we know yet where they're at with cap and trade to coming with revenue?
So cap and trade has been reauthorized. I think that what they were looking to do was create market stability and some assurances that the revenues would be there. But, last year the revenues were way down. They saw a spike upon the reauthorization, and I don't know the most recent auction revenues, but I do know that it hasn't met expectations. So, and as far as making a full rebound and saying, hey, we're flush with, money available, it's not worked out the way that anticipated. And so people are not so certain that they're trading carbon credits.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I can provide an update on that too when we come back with more on this.
Is there any other questions or comment by council before I go to public comment? No. Okay. Any other public comment? No? Okay. So, move on. Thank you.
So again, this is a free service. If ever you kind of want an update, or if there's something else that you want, either I'll bring it back to you, or we'll have Josiah come back and give another presentation.
Annoy us for free.
And it's free.
Annoy us for free.
I know.
Consolidated staff report. So we have in front of us a report from different departments. Is there any question by council for the report? Okay, I'll start because I have a bunch. The first one actually starts with fire. I don't know who's here for fire. Okay. Okay, so on the engine, you've been talking about two responding, and with the chimney fire, are we operating the ladder truck or just the regular engine? And I'm asking because I'm kind of concerned with your guys' safety with no other employees.
Sure, and the ladder isn't in service yet. We're still mounting equipment, doing training on that. You'll be briefed on when we get close to having that in service and available, and we can do some show and tell there. But right now, we're still responding with the two that we've always had.
Okay.
And it comes an issue definitely with safety. The optimum in the national standard is 4. Mainly for the reason of IDLH environments, immediately deadly to life and health. And so that's why if you're going to go into a building that has an IDLH environment, you have to have 2 people on the outside for 2 people to go in. Luckily, this incident that you're talking about it wasn't an IDLH environment.
Okay.
But we rely on other agencies outside of our control, the state and county, to provide a lot of times that 2-out personnel to allow us to be able to go inside of an IDLH environment, or to help with numerous other critical incidents that we have on a yearly basis.
Relying on them, does that impact your response time?
It doesn't, it doesn't affect our response time to the incident.
But
It could definitely affect our engagement in mitigating whatever emergency we come across, based on, laws, OSHA laws and things like that we may not be able to engage to, help the situation until we get more manpower at scene.
Thank you. I have one more. Okay, so you mentioned the grant for the apparatus, and last year we were denied. If we are denied again this year, one, how old are they, and what is the risk of us not getting, do we have a plan B, or what is the risk that we're looking at to make sure that you guys have it?
Sure. So the current breathing apparatus that we have was purchased through this grant that we're, seeking now, Assistance to Firefighters FEMA grant, and we obtained that in 2003. So this year is the 15-year kind of mark. We've been trying to obtain that grant again for the past couple of years. We tried it as a regional because they were saying that that was looked at more favorably as a regional grant. So we tried with other departments. We tried with a highway corridor type grant. And now we're going with just a local community between the two, Alpha Maloney's Fire District and us. If we're not successful in that, it is a general fund item. We're hoping, I need to look and see if possibly fire mitigation monies can be allocated for that. I don't know if that's a possibility. Other potential is financing, and potentially could be money that comes in from strike team that is, surplus to allocated budget funds.
And how many are we looking at?
Total
Replacing?
breathing apparatus around.
That we have to replace with the 15 year
all of them. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
so roughly 18 plus adding the ladder, we would need another 4, so you're looking at 22.
I got a question for Nate while he's there.
Yeah, no, I'm done.
Shoot.
Thank you.
The electrocution that you guys responded to?
Yes.
Was that as a result of a car pole, or what happened there?
It was some scaffolding that was wheeled into overhead electrical.
No fatality?
I haven't, as of the time that we, that week, there was no fatalities. What has transpired since then, I don't know.
Thanks.
I have one more. Sorry. Where is it? Sorry, bear with. I can't find it now. Okay. Moving on. Any other no? Okay. Public comment? No. Okay. Next is correspondence. And we have 2 items under that.
I have no additional information to add. I just wanted to provide this information to the council based on our audit discussion, just for general information.
Is there a council comment on that? No. Public comment? Okay. And item number 9, council report, and I will start with Councilmember Matodi.
Let's see, I have some notes. I went on February 21st
Veronica,
to...
I can't hear you.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
amazing. On February 21st, I went to the IRWM meeting over in Tuolumne, and talking about watershed and possibly trying to tap into a $2 million in bond that could be utilized in the Sierras here. Also, the GPA just put it out there that they're inviting Angels Camp to come back in if, funds are available, and they're looking at possibly doing a little restructuring on their costs on that. So, that's about it.
I went to the homeless task force. This is the first meeting. It was really just finding out what were the problems and trying to really evaluate. And we were going to have another meeting on the 22nd because we need to get a lot more information, but we were able to find things that were available that we were not aware of. And like Sierra Hope is an organization in the county. It's Amador, Calaveras, and Tuolumne. And they actually, in Angels Camp, have 4 apartments, but 3 of them may go by the wayside. This is for homeless. And so just what you could see is a lot of need and not much money. So it is. And so we're going to meet again and see if there's any way that we can find some way to really help and understand, I think, what the problem is. I don't think we quite understand enough, what are the problems and how can we meet the needs. So that's what we're looking into.
Councilmember Oliver?
On the 27th, I think it was, of February, attended the UWPA. That was my first meeting, so I was sworn into that board. There was election of officers, committee appointments. We got a rundown on the remat issue and current status with regard to the Murphy's Powerhouse. And we got an introduction to a small hydro project that's scheduled for the after bay at Murphy's. And then on Sunday, I attended a museum lecture, The Plight of the Chinese and the Mother Lode, with a focus on Amador and Calaveras counties, and that was pretty interesting to hear that, and it kind of keeping with the good product that those lectures put out. It was pretty interesting.
Councilmember Beal?
Yeah, I too attend the same UWPA meeting. I'd like to expand a little bit on, it's a company called Natel, and they're going to put in, at their cost, a power-producing machine or plant. It's a small plant. It's supposed to be really efficient, produce power, and we will realize funds and revenues off of that. And they're going to use it kind of as a showcase, because what they want to do is put these plants or small plants around the country, around the world. And so they chose our spot at Murphy's as a showroom, and so that's going to be a nice bonus for us. We've got a big flume system. It's a gravity-fed water system, and there's a lot of places along the flume we've always thought we could generate power from the water as it flows by, so this is a good opportunity for us. I attended the Coffee Talk Tuesday this morning. A lot of you were there, and it's always interesting to see what comes out. And then also, I also attended the museum lecture. It was very interesting.
The only thing I have to really report or ask out is tomorrow night's COG meeting. Just an update on where we are with the CPI reporting, because right now we're currently not updated. I don't know what's going on with that. And then we are also voting on the $44,000 that should be coming back for the Raspberry Staircase. So that's it. Any other? Oh, okay. Calendar.
Okay, tomorrow night at 5:30, there's a COG board meeting at the Supervisors' Chambers. The Planning Commission meets at 6 o'clock on Thursday, the 8th, and Living History Day is going to be happening at the museum from 10 to 4 on Saturday, the 10th. Museum Commission meets at 8:30 on the 15th, and DAC also meets on the 15th, but at 10:30 in the morning. LAFCO is at 6 p.m. on the 19th, and we're back here for council at 6 on the 20th.
Without any